Well, we've had a bit of a news in the past week that Australia is sadly in recession, and even darker clouds are gathering on the global economic horizon. So it's therefore vital we act now to get our economy going. Now, there have been some predictable calls for investment and infrastructure spending and more government-funded programs, but getting behind entrepreneurs, innovators and the risk takers in our community is the key to our recovery and a vibrant Australian economy in the future. Now, while small business has been hit hard in the past 3 months, it's this sector that is the engine room for new products, new services and jobs growth. It's therefore here, in my view, that the governments should be focusing significant efforts. Now, I see a few areas for reform. Firstly, the processes for establishing and maintaining a business across government departments and between the federal and state governments should be streamlined. As part of this, poorly designed, clunky government web portals that don't work properly and consume precious time and resource-starved startups must be fixed once and for all. Secondly, we desperately need IR reform that maintains workers' protections but makes it clear on what people should be paid. The ability of people to lodge bogus, unfair dismissal claims needs to be curtailed. Thirdly, we need further reform to tax laws to allow start-up companies to pay directors and employees in shares rather than cash, if that's what's agreed, with tax only applying when the shares are actually sold. Fourthly, we should be teaching entrepreneurship and business studies in our high schools, perhaps a bit more than climate change and gender issues. We then need to reaffirm the historical legal protections afforded by the use of the company structure that have been significantly eroded by new laws in various jurisdictions, making directors personally liable. And finally, we need a change in attitude by our politicians who 1 minute tell people to get up and have a go, but the next minute thunder darkly about wage theft or about putting directors in jail. And no, I'm not just having a go at the Labor Party. The Coalition are in on this one these days as well, sadly. So
Corey, I think you might have something to say here.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I have to say, Campbell, I agree with almost everything you've said. And one thing that particularly piqued me, because everything is political in that sense, that politicians can really change things, but was about education in schools. Now, I've lamented the fact that, you know, they don't read enough about reading and learn enough about reading and writing and arithmetic. But to teach business studies, to encourage entrepreneurship, to get successful people into schools, to talk to kids about career paths that might open up to them, I think is the key to unleashing imagination. I think it's a really huge opportunity to get innovation happening, and I don't mean that as a buzzword like it was used as a political tool a while ago. It is about making kids think anything can happen, and they need role models. And I got to tell you, I don't think teachers are the role models in entrepreneurship. We need really, really successful people to go in and say, hey, this could be you if this is your dream, whether it be a social justice agenda, whether it be a making money agenda, or, you know, corporate leadership or governance, whatever it is. Inspiration comes from example. That's my view, but well, what do you think?
What do you think about that, Antoinette? Yeah.
Yeah, look, I agree that we certainly need our culture, our entrepreneur culture to shift. There was a really interesting study that's just come out recently from the University of Sydney that compared the way Australians perceive their ability to start a business and whether they'll have a success rate. And it found that we're quite risk averse compared to the United States, even though we've been deemed by the World Bank to have the right kind of infrastructure and tools to succeed as an entrepreneur. So I wonder what it is that we can do to tackle that risk aversion, that, you know, that I can't do it, perhaps it will fail, because unless we approach that attitude, I'm just not sure whether the ideas will follow, because a lot of it is about risks, it is about innovation, and if we don't have that culture, I fear that's where we'll lag behind in terms of our recovery.
Well, Antoinette, we are basically, I think, a risk-averse economy. I mean, I'll be a bit provocative. I think Australians view themselves as robust, resilient, self-reliant people. Sadly, I don't think we are too much these days. And when something goes wrong or business is seen to have done the wrong thing by a customer or an employee, there is a huge pile-on in the media, and of course the politicians follow, and that's what I was alluding to in my editorial. But Catherine, what do you think some of the important things are here?
I'm in large agreement with you as well, Campbell. I think one thing I'd throw in also, I like your point about getting some rigour back into the curriculum, and I endorse what Corey had to say there too. That we're tacking on so many fashionable ideological causes that have been injected into the curriculum. It's particularly the case in Victoria, dare I say it. But one other thing that springs to mind, as someone who has drifted in and out of being self-employed and freelancing, is the overreaction after the Banking Royal Commission in terms of even getting a modest overdraft against an unencumbered mortgage. They simply will not lend to you if you haven't got a PAYE group certificate, basically. So there's the banks are putting out all these touchy-feely commercials that we're all in it together. But I know what they've done, and you'd know it as well if you've got friends in regional Queensland. The farmers who have been taking their own lives, desperate ahead of foreclosures, driven to desperation. We're all in it together in terms of the bank. They lower the boom on the productive part of the economy in a heartbeat. And this is, closing on this for you, Campbell, this is a private sector depression we're seeing at the moment. There are plenty of people making decisions about lockdowns and so on, although not enforcing them as we saw today in the streets of a number of our cities, that are killing small businesses, killing our entrepreneurial class, and they're doing it without even taking a haircut. They're not drawing breath between.
I think moving beyond JobKeeper, so what JobKeeper's been able to do is sustain some businesses who've managed to pivot, that now they've started making hand sanitizer, or they've moved into telehealth or food, or working on consumer apps. But we also need to think about what entrepreneurship looks like post-COVID, when we don't need our contactless food delivery, where we're not all necessarily working from home. And I think that's where we need to reconsider manufacturing, but not manufacturing as we once knew it, advanced manufacturing, and perhaps aligning ourselves more closely with the United States, particularly with the West Coast when it comes to technology, innovation and manufacturing.
But you can't do that with the existing labour market model.
Yeah. Well, there's the labour market issue.
Campbell.
Yep, sure.
Sorry, you and Antoinette both early on made this point about acceptance of failure or fear of failure in this country. I agree with you, but I wonder whether it's changing. I mean, we've had entrepreneurs now, particularly in that startup space, which is really where we need people to be, who have tried and not succeeded previously, and we're not judging them as harshly as perhaps in previous times where things haven't worked. You made the point, very valid, Campbell, that if companies do the wrong thing or management do the wrong thing that's dishonest or along those lines, we are very harsh judges. But don't you think we're becoming a bit more American in the sense of, OK, you didn't work out before, but maybe you've learned something from it, we'll back you on a new venture. Do you get that sense at all,
Corey,
or is it just me?
Well, Corey, I am in the startup space. I'm a director with two different startups currently, and I've been on another one, an agri-tech company that's doing great things. But I've got to tell you, look, here's an issue I plugged into that editorial, that this is a reform that no one seems to want to undertake, and it's this, that startups don't have a lot of cash. And often they'd like to do a deal where they would like to get, say, a director with a bit of grey hair and experience, male or female, to come in, and they can't afford them. And if they pay them shares, guess what? And look, immediately there'll be people there in the bureaucracy tonight who might be watching go, yes, well, you can have options. It's not. It hasn't been sorted out. The way this works is if you take shares, you'll be taxed by the ATO on the deemed value of those shares in that financial year. And guess what? After putting in, hour upon hour for, say, 2 or 3 year period, paying then tax on those shares, if the company doesn't make it, you pay tax on the shares and the shares are worthless. That's the tax system in Australia, and it is absolute rubbish. So that's something that the Prime Minister could deal with right now, but don't let the ATO get their paw prints all over it and de-water it and put in so many damn things that it ultimately becomes meaningless. But that's just an example. But I think we're very risk averse. And I don't think the culture in our schools, by the way, with a lot of our teachers, I'm afraid, is one that actually celebrates people in business. I think there's a suspicion in Australian society about those in business because they're about the profit motive, and that's a terrible thing. Just ask anybody in the ABC